After 12 long years, Daniel Brooks, a weary veteran, returned to the old sawmill his father built by the river. But why now? Why come back to a place buried under snow, silence, and scars no one talks about anymore? As the wind howled through broken windows, his German Shepherd Rex froze, ears sharp, tail still. Beneath the dusty floorboards, the dog began to dig. And what they found there would uncover a truth Daniel's father had hidden. A secret powerful enough to rebuild not just a broken mill, but a broken man. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in second chances, make sure to subscribe. Mist feathered low over a quiet river. Fresh snow lay white across a pine valley, thinning into wet patches where early spring pressed through. The old sawmill loomed dark and still, while a pale, warm break slipped between gray clouds and kissed the wet wood with faint gold. From the left edge of the valley, a man and a dog came on foot through the shallow snow, their footprints stringing a thin path toward the building, as if the land itself were guiding them back. The man was Daniel Brooks, 46, the kind of sturdy you get from years of hauling crates, not lifting weights. He wore a collared beige canvas truck jacket with a shirt-style collar, no hood, over a beige button-up shirt, untucked above dark charcoal chinos and worn brown boots scuffed by places the map never named. His hair was short, hazel brown, with faint silver at the temples. A low-days beard shadowed a jawline that could look severe when he wasn't paying attention. He walked with a weary steadiness, a man who had carried too much silence for too long. Beside him trotted Rex, a mature sable German shepherd. His coat, a living gradient of brown to black, glinted faintly under the pale sun. A thin scar traced his muzzle, an old shrapnel mark from service days. His eyes, deep amber, carried both loyalty and knowledge. Man and dog moved together, their rhythm exact, as if years of danger had synchronized even their breathing. The river mill dominated the midground, a two-story structure of warped pine and rusted iron, its siding cracked, its balcony rails sagging. Moss thickened the roof edges. Ivy and winter-dead vines gripped the posts like frozen veins. Tufts of grass and saplings pushed through the porch boards, defying the cold. To the right, a broken water wheel lay half-submerged under ice. Above it hung a cracked sign that still faintly read, "The River Mill." Daniel paused a few yards away. His breath came in slow puffs, the kind that looked visible only because everything else was so still. 12 years. That was how long it had been since he'd stood here. 12 since his father's death. 12 since the army, the sand, the explosion that took 3 good men and left only questions. The official report had cleared him. No operator error, no negligence. But no report could silence the noise that kept replaying in his head. He stared at the mill, its tired frame against the snow, and felt both belonging and guilt rise together like heat. Daniel reached the porch. The boards groaned under his weight, and frost cracked under his boots. When his hand touched the door, the wood felt almost alive, cold on the surface, but holding the faint pulse of memory beneath. Rex's ears twitched, scanning the air. The dog stood half a step ahead, body tense but calm. "Clear?" Daniel asked softly. Rex's tail gave one slow, confident sweep. The latch resisted, then yielded with a sigh. The air smelled of pine, rust, and forgotten time. Light filtered through broken windows and thin white ribbons. Dust floated like slow snowflakes. Tools hung from the wall, their outlines still marking where others had once been. Daniel moved carefully, tracing his hand along a workbench. Every groove and nick told a story. His father's steady hands, his own clumsy teenage mistakes. At the far wall hung a cracked photograph. His father, James Brooks, stood proud beside a new water wheel, sleeves rolled, sunlight cutting his face in half warmth, half resolve. Daniel's throat tightened. "You did good work, old man," he murmured. The mill echoed back nothing, yet somehow that silence felt like an answer. The quiet pressed around him. He saw flashes. The desert. The blast. The instant where time folded and the world roared. He had done everything right. He had followed the blueprints, checked the seals, warned his men. But systems fail. And when they did, no one asked the machine for forgiveness. He rubbed his scarred right hand, feeling the stiffness where burn met bone. "It wasn't my fault," he said softly. The words sounded weak against wood and wind. Rex brushed against him, warm and solid. The dog didn't need to speak. Presence was enough. Rex moved toward the corner of the room, nose low. Then he stopped, paw pressed against a single floorboard. A sharp, hollow sound answered. Daniel knelt, tapping the wood. Not soft, just empty beneath. The plank lifted slightly at one edge, too clean to be natural. Someone had replaced it. "Good nose?" Daniel said quietly. Rex's tail flicked once. He considered prying it open, but stopped. Not tonight. Some secrets belonged to daylight. The last light faded beyond the trees. Through a crack in the roof, thin snowflakes drifted down like ash. Daniel set down his duffel and spread his jacket near the wall. He sat beside Rex, listening to the river's muffled rhythm outside. "Tomorrow," he said to no one in particular. The dog sighed, head on paws, half awake. For the first time in 12 years, Daniel felt something stirring. Not hope, not yet, but a quiet kind of readiness. The kind that comes when winter begins to loosen its grip. By the time the river thawed, winter had become a rumor. Thin sheets of ice drifted along the current, breaking apart beneath the morning sun. Around the river mill, snow lingered only in the shadows, retreating to the roots of pines. The air smelled of wet bark, thawing soil, and rusted metal. Each dawn came earlier now, with birds calling from unseen branches, as if trying to remind the valley how to wake. Inside the mill, Daniel Brooks stirred from sleep. The floor beneath him had warmed slightly overnight, the wood breathing again after years of cold neglect. Beside him, Rex lay curled like a sentinel off duty, his thick sable coat rising and falling in a rhythm as steady as the ticking of time itself. For the first time in years, Daniel had slept without waking in panic. The dreams still came, the flash, the roar, the three names. But morning had won this time. He rose slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Light poured through the gaps in the planks, laying gold ribbons across the dusty floorboards. The plank Rex had found the day before waited, slightly raised, as if holding its breath. Daniel knelt beside it, ran his hand over the seam, and whispered, "You still sure about this, boy?" Rex answered with a quiet whine. Not impatience, but permission. Daniel smiled faintly, reached for a screwdriver, and began to pry the plank loose. The wood gave after a few seconds, revealing a hollow pocket beneath. Something metallic winked faintly under the shadows. Wrapped in an oilcloth stiff with age lay a small iron box, corners worn smooth, its lid shut with a corroded padlock. Daniel turned it over in his hands. It was heavier than it looked, not just with rust and years, but with intent. He fetched his father's hammer from the tool wall, one precise strike, then another, and the padlock gave way with a sigh rather than a crack. Inside were folded papers, bound together with a faded strip of red cloth. The top page read, in bold block letters, "The River Mill Restoration." Beneath it, a series of hand-drawn blueprints, clean, symmetrical, confident, every measurement annotated in his father's careful handwriting. But, tucked between the diagrams, lay something else. A letter. Daniel hesitated before unfolding it. His thumb brushed the paper's fragile edge, the fibers trembling slightly in the breeze sneaking through the wall cracks. "Daniel, if you are reading this, then you've come back. Or perhaps the mill has called you home. You carry guilt for what wasn't yours to bear. Let it rest now. I built this place to last, but not everything I made was right. The river mill was never meant to stand on wood alone. It needed faith, and hands willing to forgive their own mistakes. If you are here, then build again, not for me, but for the man you still are. James Brooks." Daniel lowered the letter, eyes unfocused, breath held between disbelief and recognition. His father had known the way. Silence can bruise, the way a man can keep walking long after the war ends, but never leave it behind. He leaned back against the bench, the iron box on his lap, the scent of old paper mingling with dust and thaw. Rex rested his chin on Daniel's knee, watching him with that quiet, unwavering patience only dogs possess. "He knew," Daniel murmured, voice raw. "All these years, he knew what I was carrying." Rex nudged his arm once, soft, grounding. Daniel let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Guess that makes two of you who never stop believing in me. Later that morning, a faint engine hum rolled through the valley. Daniel stepped outside, blinking against the sunlight that reflected off melting snow. A pickup truck slowed near the fence line, an old Ford, its blue paint faded to dust. Behind the wheel was a woman he didn't recognize. She got out with the cautious ease of someone who knows how to work the land. Tall, lean, her movements deliberate. She wore a worn leather jacket over a flannel shirt and faded jeans tucked into scuffed brown boots. Her hair, light brown streaked by sun, was tied back loosely with a patterned scarf. Her face held the weathered calm of a life spent outdoors, and her eyes, clear green with a fleck of amber, carried both strength and curiosity. "Didn't think anyone lived up here anymore," she called, hands resting on her hips. Daniel brushed sawdust from his jacket. "Didn't, until recently." She smiled slightly. "Name's Sarah Miller. My father used to trade lumber with yours, back when this place was alive. Saw the chimney smoking this morning. Figured I'd check before the ranger does." Daniel nodded. "Guess the mill still knows how to draw people in." Sarah stepped closer, studying the building's facade, the moss on the eaves, the broken wheel, the leaning balcony. "You planning to fix it?" He hesitated, then lifted the folded blueprints he'd tucked under his arm. "Seems like someone wanted me to." "James Brooks," she said softly, recognizing the handwriting from afar. "He was one of the good ones, built more than he sold, if you know what I mean." Daniel smiled, faint but sincere. "Yeah, he built people." Her expression softened. "Then you've got work to do." She offered to help. Her family ran a small supply yard down in town, and she said she could bring up lumber and nails if Daniel needed them. He thanked her, unsure how to accept kindness after so many years of isolation. She didn't push. Before leaving, she knelt briefly to scratch Rex behind the ears, and the dog, after one careful sniff, accepted her like he'd made up his mind. When her truck disappeared beyond the bend, the silence felt less empty than before. Daniel turned back toward the mill, Rex trotting behind him. Inside, sunlight had shifted, pooling golden across the workbench. He spread the blueprints flat, anchoring them with tools. The handwriting, his father's, was neat but human, the kind that carried care instead of perfection. Notes in the margins read, "Sand the old boards, save what can be saved," and "Strength isn't in weight, it's in balance." Daniel traced the lines with one finger, thinking of his father's hands, broad, steady, worn smooth from work and mercy alike. He remembered standing beside him as a boy, the smell of sawdust and tobacco, the way the man would smile at a board that bent but didn't break. "You're stronger than you think," his father had said once. It sounded like carpentry advice back then. Now it sounded like forgiveness. He spent the afternoon clearing debris, stacking salvageable beams, brushing rust off tools that still had fight left in them. Rex followed his movements with quiet devotion, lying near the door whenever Daniel climbed the ladder to test the roof's strength. By evening, the air had changed again. The river's song was louder now, confident. A breeze carried the earthy scent of thawed ground, the promise of rain. Daniel stepped out onto the porch, wiping sweat and sawdust from his forehead. Across the valley, smoke rose from a distant chimney. Sarah's, he guessed. He stood there a while, arms folded, watching light fade across the hills. Rex sat beside him, ears relaxed, eyes steady on the horizon. Daniel spoke quietly, more to the mill than to himself. "You got me back here, old man. Now let's see if I'm worth what you left behind." Rex's tail brushed once against the porch. The gesture said everything. When dusk finally took the valley, Daniel sat on the porch steps, the letter in his hands once more. He read it under the dim amber of the lantern he'd fixed earlier. His father's handwriting blurred a little, but the meaning only grew clearer. Some structures don't stand because of the nails that hold them. They stand because of the hands that keep returning to mend them. Behind him, the mill creaked softly in the wind, like a giant exhaling. The river murmured below, and the scent of new rain came rolling through the pines. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling something inside him loosen. Not gone, not forgotten, but gentler now. The ice, both outside and within, was finally beginning to melt. By late spring, the valley had turned green again. The river that once whispered under ice now ran clear and confident, reflecting the sunlight like scattered glass. Wildflowers grew along the fence line, and bees hovered over the pale blooms by the porch. The river mill no longer looked abandoned, not yet alive, but breathing again. Daniel Brooks stood in the yard, his sleeves rolled up, sweat on his temples, and sawdust clinging to his shirt. The smell of cut pine hung in the air, sweet and sharp, a scent that carried both exhaustion and peace. Inside, the mill had begun to change. Daniel had replaced half the roof beams with new timber Sarah had brought from her family's yard. The walls still leaned, but less than before. There was order now among the chaos. Tools cleaned and hung, the workbench cleared, light finding its way back through the windows. Rex lay near the doorway, panting lightly, tail tapping the floor every time Daniel passed by. It was a quiet morning, the kind where labor filled the silence instead of words. Daniel tightened the bolts on the old generator by the back wall. He'd found it last week under a tarp, half rusted but intact, a relic from the time when the river mill had powered its own saws. The thought of bringing light back to this place felt symbolic, like resurrecting not just a building, but a heartbeat. He ran his hand across the machine's metal casing, feeling the rough cold beneath the dust. "All right, old friend," he muttered, half to himself, half to the mill. "Let's see if you've still got a spark left in you." Rex lifted his head at the sound of the word spark, ears flicking forward. Daniel smiled faintly and bent to prime the fuel line. The faint smell of oil filled the room. He gave the cord one solid pull. The motor coughed, hesitated, then sputtered alive, weak but real. A hum rolled through the floorboards. Then came the flash. A burst of orange jumped from the base of the generator, finding the pile of sawdust Daniel had swept earlier but not yet discarded. In seconds, flame caught the edge of a beam, licking upward with shocking speed. The sound was immediate, a dry crackle turning to a roar. For a moment, Daniel froze. The firelight danced across the walls, and his body reacted before his mind could separate past from present. The color, the heat, the sound. It was the desert again, the explosion that took everything, the blast wave that had thrown him into silence for 12 years. He stumbled back, his breath shortening, heart hammering. The fire snapped, louder, closer. Smoke filled the air, thick and acrid. He reached for the extinguisher, but his hands wouldn't close. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. Flame, sound, memory. Then Rex barked, a single sharp command that cut through the fog. The dog lunged forward, gripping Daniel's sleeve with his teeth, tugging him toward the open door. The movement jolted him out of paralysis. Daniel staggered, coughing, clutching the doorway as smoke poured out behind them. They stumbled onto the porch, gasping. Rex barked again, circling back toward the entrance, but Daniel caught his collar. "No," he rasped. "Stay with me." He grabbed the water bucket from the railing, dousing the flames nearest the threshold before they could spread further. Steam hissed, rising in white plumes. Sarah's voice came faint from down the road. "Daniel! What happened?" He looked up to see her running toward the mill, her boots thudding against the dirt, a coil of rope slung over her shoulder. Her hair was undone, her face flushed, and her eyes, bright and focused, swept across the scene in seconds. "Generator sparked," Daniel coughed. "Caught the dust pile." Sarah grabbed a second bucket, drawing water from the river trough and tossing it across the smoldering boards. Together, they worked until the last ember gave up its light, leaving behind the sharp, metallic smell of wet ash. Daniel leaned against the porch post, his chest rising hard and fast, every muscle trembling from adrenaline and memory. Rex sat close, head low, eyes locked on his face, worried, protective, waiting for permission to stand down. Sarah set the bucket aside, wiped her brow with the back of her hand, and studied him for a moment. "You're pale as chalk," she said quietly. "You all right?" He tried to nod, but couldn't find the word. She stepped closer, voice low but firm. "You were somewhere else just now, weren't you?" He exhaled through his nose, shaky. "Yeah." She didn't press, didn't ask. Instead, she sat down beside him on the step, boots resting on the dirt, hands loosely clasped. "My brother came back from Iraq 10 years ago," she said after a pause. "Couldn't sit near fireworks for years. Even the sound of thunder made him leave the room." Daniel stared at the ground, smoke still curling from the charred floor inside. "It's like, it waits for me," he murmured. "All it takes is one sound, One flash, and I'm right there again. Doesn't matter how much time's passed. Sarah nodded. The trick, he said, was learning not to fight it, just to know what it is when it comes. Rex nudged Daniel's arm again, his fur warm and damp. Daniel looked at him, those amber eyes clear and full of something human. The memory of the firelight reflected in them, not fear, just concern. Loyalty made flesh. Daniel reached out, fingers brushing the dog's head. "You saved me," he said softly. "You always do." Rex's tail moved once, slow and sure. Sarah smiled faintly. "Looks like someone's got your back." He managed a weak laugh. "Has for years." The sun had started to lower behind the pines, its orange glow stretching long across the yard. The mill stood dark now, the fire out, smoke thinning into the quiet air. Daniel stared at the building's scorched corner, the blackened wood steaming in the last light. "Guess we're rebuilding again," he said. Sarah glanced at him. "Then you'll need more boards, and maybe someone to make sure you don't burn the place down next time." He looked at her, caught off guard by the teasing in her tone. "You volunteering?" "Maybe," she said with a half smile, "if you can handle company." He breathed out slowly, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "Might be time I learned how." Rex barked once, sharp but content. The echo rolled down the valley and came back softer, almost like laughter. When night fell, Daniel sat on the porch steps again, the smell of smoke still clinging to his clothes. The stars were faint behind thin clouds. Rex lay beside him, head resting on his boot. Daniel's hand moved absently through the dog's fur, still coarse from soot and ash. He thought of the fire, the fear, the noise, the heat, and of the hand that had not let him fall. This time, it wasn't a soldier who'd pulled him back from the brink. It was a dog, a friend, a reminder that salvation sometimes comes in quieter forms. "Wasn't your fault," he said softly, looking down at Rex. "Wasn't mine either." The dog looked up, eyes reflecting the lantern light, steady and forgiving. Daniel smiled, faint but real, and leaned back against the porch post. For the first time in 12 years, the past felt like something he could live after, not inside. The mill creaked softly in the breeze, tired but still standing. The river ran on, carrying ash and memory alike, and somewhere deep in its rhythm, Daniel heard something he hadn't heard in a long time. Peace. Early summer came gently to Maple Bend. The last traces of ash had washed away with the rain, and the river now shimmered like liquid glass under the morning sun. The grass around the river mill had turned lush and green, bending with the wind that carried the scent of pine and wild mint. Birds had nested in the eaves, and bees hummed lazily near the water wheel. The scars on the old wood were still there, blackened streaks where fire had once raged, but in the golden light, they looked less like wounds and more like veins. Daniel Brooks leaned against the porch railing, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, a faint streak of soot still under one fingernail. He had rebuilt half of the mill's interior by hand, each board planed smooth, each nail driven with care. He'd stopped counting the days since the fire. Time had lost its sharp edges. The nightmares still came, but not every night, and when they did, Rex's quiet breathing beside him was enough to bring him back. Rex had recovered from the burns he got during the fire, but a small patch on his flank still needed care. The fur hadn't grown back yet, and Daniel worried more than he admitted. He was cleaning the porch steps when he heard a car engine approach, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. A small green Subaru stopped near the gate. From it stepped a woman Daniel had never seen before. She was tall and sunlit, maybe late 30s, with long auburn hair tied back in a loose braid that caught the morning light like copper thread. Her skin was fair but freckled from years outdoors, and she wore a light denim jacket over a linen shirt, khaki trousers tucked into hiking boots. Her hands, when she waved in greeting, were rough in a way that belonged to someone who worked, not someone who merely spoke. "Morning," she said, smiling with calm confidence. "You must be Daniel Brooks." Daniel straightened, a little guarded but polite. "That's right. You're with the Forestry Service?" "Not quite," she said, walking closer. "I'm Dr. Sarah Whitmore, local veterinarian. Sarah Miller mentioned you and said Rex might need a check." Daniel glanced at the dog. Rex stood by the porch, ears perked, studying the stranger. The dog's instinct was sharp, but he didn't bristle, just observed. "She did she?" Daniel said. Sarah's smile softened. She's got a good heart, that one. Told me you had a bit of an accident here. Thought I'd lend a hand. Daniel nodded, grateful but still slightly uneasy under attention. Appreciate it. He's been favoring his left side since the fire. Sarah crouched near Rex, extending a hand without touching him first. Hey there, soldier, she murmured. You're a handsome one, aren't you? Her voice carried the warm steadiness animals trust before people do. Rex sniffed her wrist, then leaned forward, tail giving a small wag. Acceptance. She began her examination with practiced ease, her movements calm and sure. It's healing well, she said after a moment. Just needs a bit of ointment for the scar tissue. You did a good job keeping it clean. Daniel crossed his arms, a modest shrug. Didn't have much choice. He's saved me more times than I can count. Sarah glanced up, meeting his eyes. So I've heard. There was something direct about her gaze, professional yet kind, the way someone looks at both the wound and the person behind it. She rose, dusting off her knees. I used to work with search and rescue dogs in Montana, she said. They're stubborn, loyal, and often smarter than the people they save. I left after we lost one of our best in a storm. Decided to start something new, something that helps both the handlers and the dogs heal together. Daniel tilted his head, intrigued. You mean therapy? More like restoration, Sarah replied. A rehabilitation center for veterans and rescue animals. A place where both can recover side by side. I've been looking for a site, somewhere quiet, with water access, land, and a story worth saving. She looked past him, toward the mill. And then I see this place. Daniel followed her gaze. The mill stood proud again, patched and imperfect, but dignified. The reflection of its frame rippled in the river. For the first time, he saw it not as what it had been, but what it could become. This place has its share of stories, he said quietly. Sarah smiled. Then it's got the right soul for what I need. They walked along the riverbank as they talked. The air shimmered with the heat of noon, and dragonflies darted between reeds. Sarah asked about the mill's history, and Daniel told her how his father had built it after returning from the army. How it was meant to provide lumber for local families, not profit. Just work that kept the town alive. And what about you? She asked. What brought you back? Daniel hesitated, watching Rex trot ahead through the tall grass. I thought I was done with fixing things, he said finally. But maybe I just didn't know what broken really looked like. Sarah nodded, understanding the kind of pain that doesn't need elaboration. You know, she said, when I worked with rescue dogs, we had one named Scout. He'd lost his handler in a flood, refused to eat for weeks. But one day, he started nudging the kennel gate, looking at the door like he wanted out again. It's not that he forgot. He just finally realized surviving was its own kind of loyalty. Daniel's voice was low when he answered. Sounds like Rex. They stopped near the water, the sunlight broken into 1,000 ripples. Rex splashed at the edge, drinking, then shook off and trotted back, soaking Daniel's boots. Sarah laughed, the sound light and easy. And Daniel found himself smiling, not out of politeness, but because something in that sound reminded him of warmth before the world went cold. You ever think, she asked softly, that maybe this place could be something like that? A space where surviving doesn't have to be the end of the story? Daniel looked at the mill again. Maybe it already is. We just haven't rebuilt it yet. Sarah turned toward him, eyebrows raised, impressed by the simplicity of the thought. Then that's your answer. They spent the afternoon walking the property, measuring ground and tracing boundaries. Sarah's notebook filled quickly. Sketches, ideas, a list of things to restore. She worked methodically but with visible passion, explaining how hydropower from the river could run basic facilities again, how the upper floor could host training rooms and sleeping quarters. Daniel listened, occasionally offering small corrections or memories from the mill's old days. The conversation was effortless, born of shared purpose. When they stopped for water, Daniel noticed a small scar at the edge of Sarah's jaw, pale, old. He didn't ask, but she caught his glance and smiled faintly. Horse kick, years ago. Broke the jaw, taught me patience the hard way. Daniel chuckled quietly. Life's got creative teachers. Yours too, I'd imagine. He nodded. Yeah, just took me longer to start listening. By evening, the river burned gold with the sinking sun. Sarah packed her bag and placed a small tin of ointment on the porch railing. "For Rex," she said, "twice a day, until the fur grows back." Daniel took it, thumb brushing the metal. "Thank you. For this. And for the idea." She looked toward the mill, its windows catching the last light like eyes waking from sleep. Ideas only matter if someone's willing to build them. He smiled, the warmth of the day still in his voice. "Then maybe we start here." Sarah paused, met his gaze. "Maybe we already have." As she drove away, the sound of her car faded into the hum of crickets. Daniel stood on the porch, Rex beside him, the tin of ointment still in his hand. The river flowed steady and sure, and the mill seemed to stand taller in the twilight. He looked down at Rex. "You hear that, boy? Looks like we got a new mission." Rex wagged his tail once, as if to say he'd already known. And under the glow of the first summer stars, the river mill, once a place of loss, began to feel like home again. By midsummer, Maple Bend had turned wild with color. The meadows shimmered in greens and golds, the river ran strong and restless, and the air pulsed with the electric heat that came before a storm. The river mill stood sturdier now, though still half-finished. Its new beams smelled of fresh pine, and the patched windows caught the late light like glass eyes remembering how to see. Daniel Brooks had spent most of the morning on the roof, tightening braces before the rain came. Sweat streaked his neck, his beige workshirt clinging to his shoulders, the color darkened by effort and sun. Below him, Rex paced the yard, uneasy. The German shepherd, now fully healed, had grown more watchful lately, sensing the storm long before Daniel saw it forming beyond the ridge. The dog's sable coat glistened with the shimmer of heat, every hair tuned to the shifting air pressure. Daniel glanced down and smiled. "Don't worry, old boy," he called. "Just clouds. We'll be fine." But by mid-afternoon, the clouds were no longer clouds. They were bruises rolling across the sky, low and heavy. The wind began to shift, cutting sharp from the north. It carried the scent of iron and rain. Daniel climbed down the ladder and stood for a moment, scanning the horizon. The valley had gone strange and silent, the way the world does when it's holding its breath. He was tightening the final tarp over the window frame when a truck engine growled up the hill. Sarah Whitmore stepped out, hair pulled into a quick knot that the wind immediately tried to undo. She wore her denim jacket again, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and her boots left clear prints in the soft dirt. "You planning to ride this thing out up there?" she shouted over the rising wind. Daniel grinned faintly. "Figured I'd give the storm a fair fight." Sarah frowned, but there was humor behind it. "That's not how you win a fight, Brooks." Rex barked once as lightning laced the far tree line. The sound that followed wasn't thunder yet. It was the groan of pressure changing, a deep inhalation before the crash. Sarah looked up at the roof. "You still have loose boards. You need to tie them down, or they'll fly straight into the river." Daniel nodded. "Help me pass the rope." He climbed halfway back up, the ladder shaking under each gust. The first drops of rain were warm and heavy, splattering on his sleeves. He reached for the rope Sarah tossed him, wrapping it around the nearest beam. The sky cracked open with light. For the next 10 minutes, they worked in silence, shouting only when necessary. 2 people and 1 dog moving like muscle memory, as though they had done this 100 times. The wind tore at their clothes, and the smell of wet pine thickened. "Daniel, come down," Sarah yelled finally. "That's enough. 1 more beam," he called back. But before he could tie it, the ladder shifted, 1 leg sliding in the mud. The board, beneath his foot, gave way with a snap. The world tilted. He fell. The impact knocked the breath from his chest, and in the next instant he was tumbling down the embankment, the rain blurring his vision, the earth turning to water under him. Then the cold shock of the river swallowed him whole. The current was stronger than it looked. It caught him by the shoulders and spun him downstream. For a second he fought, then panic froze him. Not from the water, but from memory. The roar was the same as before, that same deafening rush from the explosion 12 years ago. The air vanished, sound folded into white noise, and all he could see was light and ash. "Daniel!" Sarah's voice was somewhere above, distant and breaking apart in the wind. And then, movement. A blur of brown and black leaping from the bank. Rex hit the water hard, his body slicing the current with terrifying certainty. He swam straight toward Daniel, head low, tail cutting through the surface. The dog reached him just as Daniel's head slipped under again. Teeth caught the collar of his shirt, strong and insistent, jerking upward. Daniel gasped, choking river water and air in the same breath. "Easy, boy, easy," he rasped, gripping Rex's fur as they fought the pull together. The current dragged them sideways until Rex found footing near the shallows, claws scraping gravel. Inch by inch, the dog pulled, muscles shivering under the strain. Daniel kicked until his boots hit ground. Then the two of them collapsed onto the riverbank in a heap of mud, breath, and rain. For a long moment, they just lay there. The sky cracked again, the rain pouring harder, beating against their faces like forgiveness that hurt. Rex crawled closer, pressing his wet body against Daniel's chest, his heart pounding as wildly as the man's. Daniel coughed, then laughed, a sharp, breathless sound that surprised even him. "You did it again," he said hoarsely. "You pulled me out." Rex whined softly, ears back, as if embarrassed by the praise. Sarah came running down the hill, mud streaking her jeans, rain soaking her hair to her face. "Are you insane?" she shouted, but her voice broke halfway between anger and relief. She dropped to her knees beside them, checking Daniel's head, his arm, then Rex's side. "You could have drowned." Daniel sat up slowly, wincing. "Almost did," he said, "but I had backup." Sarah looked at Rex, her eyes softening. "That's one hell of a partner you've got." "He's saved me more than once," Daniel said. "Usually from myself." The rain began to ease. The thunder rolled farther away now, muttering like an old god satisfied with his work. Across the valley, light broke through, a faint orange shimmer filtering through the trees. The storm wasn't gone, but it was passing. Sarah stood, extending her hand. "Come on, soldier, let's get you both dry." Daniel took her hand, her grip strong and sure. They climbed the hill together, Rex trotting beside them, mud flying from his paws. At the porch, Sarah grabbed an old blanket from the chair and wrapped it around Daniel's shoulders. He looked at her, drenched, shivering, and half smiling. "I thought I'd learned to stop picking fights I can't win," he said. She shook her head. "You're still here. I'd call that a win." Rex barked once, short and proud, as if agreeing. They stood in silence for a while, watching the rain turn to mist. The air was cool now, smelling of wet earth and pine sap. The water wheel creaked softly as it began to turn again, its rhythm steady, patient, like breathing after panic. Daniel sat on the porch steps, Rex leaning against his leg, both of them dripping but calm. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think every fall was punishment. But maybe it's just another way to start again." Sarah leaned against the post beside him, her expression gentle. "Maybe that's what storms are for," she said. "They remind you what's worth rebuilding when the sky clears." He looked at the horizon. The clouds had split wide open, revealing a streak of gold and rose across the valley, the kind of light that makes everything seem possible again. The river shimmered, reflecting the sky, and for the first time since he'd returned, Daniel felt completely alive, raw, soaked, laughing, but alive. Rex nudged his arm again, his fur still damp, eyes gleaming with something that looked like pride. Daniel ruffled the dog's head and whispered, "You saved me, boy. Not just today." The dog rested his chin on Daniel's knee, exhaling a long, satisfied sigh. The day ended not in ruin, but in color. The world washed clean, the scent of rain still fresh, the promise of light breaking through. The storm had come and gone, but what it left behind wasn't destruction. It was proof that even when everything falls apart, sometimes the river gives you back what matters most. By late summer, the river mill no longer looked forgotten. The scent of fresh sawdust filled the valley, mingling with wild honeysuckle and the sound of hammers echoing across the water. The river, now calm after the storms, glimmered in the sunlight like a ribbon of silver winding through the trees. The once ruined structure stood tall again, scarred, yes, but proud. And for the first time in years, it was alive with voices. Daniel Brooks stood at the edge of the worksite, sleeves rolled high, his forearms lined with fine cuts and dust. His beige canvas jacket was tied around his waist, and a nail tucked behind his ear like a habit he'd carried since youth. Sweat streaked the side of his temple, and his eyes, clear, steady, and older than his 46 years, scanned the crew around him. Sarah Whitmore moved between them like a steady current. She wore her hair tied up this time, strands escaping the braid and catching sunlight. Her face, usually pale from long clinic hours, now carried a soft summer flush. She had managed to rally nearly half the town: veterans, students, a few local carpenters, even an old priest who insisted on blessing every new beam with a prayer and a tap of his cane. There was Frank Delaney, a retired sergeant in his 60s with a chest still broad as an oak trunk. His beard was gray and thick, his humor sharper than his saw. Next to him worked Ethan Rowe, a 21-year-old farmhand with hands too soft for labor, but a determination that impressed even Daniel. There was also Lila Hart, the schoolteacher, short, wiry, with streaks of silver through her black hair, who had brought her class to help paint signs for the new project. They called it the River Mill Restoration Initiative, but to everyone there, it was more than a project. It was proof that Maple Bend still knew how to build something together. Rex lay in the shade of the willow by the water, one paw crossed over the other, tail swishing lazily every now and then. His eyes followed every motion, every ladder lifted, every hammer swing. To anyone else, he was just resting, but Daniel knew better. The dog's stillness wasn't idleness, it was watchfulness, the same quiet awareness that had saved Daniel's life more than once. At midday, Sarah blew a whistle. "Break time," she called, her voice carrying over the hum of the saws. "Everyone, water and shade." The crew gathered by the riverside. Sarah passed around lemonade and sandwiches she'd packed in a wicker basket, her sleeves rolled, freckles showing against the tan of her arms. Daniel joined them a few minutes later, sitting on an overturned crate beside Frank. "You ever think," Frank said between bites, "how something broken can bring so many people together?" Daniel smiled faintly. "That's kind of the point, isn't it?" Frank grunted. "Guess so. But it's funny. I've seen buildings rise faster in war than peace. Out there, we build to survive. Here, we build to remember." Sarah overheard, her expression softening. "Or to forgive," she said quietly. The breeze caught her hair, and for a moment no one spoke. The sound of the river filled the pause. Daniel looked around, at the old men showing teenagers how to hold a hammer, at the women laughing over fresh paint, at the sunlight filtering through the open rafters, and something stirred in him. "My father used to say," he murmured, "when your heart doesn't know where to go, let your hands work. They'll always find the way back." Sarah smiled. "Sounds like a man who understood healing." "He did," Daniel said softly, "even when I didn't." By afternoon, work resumed. Daniel climbed to the upper frame, checking the alignment of the new beams. The air was thick with heat, shimmering above the river, and every sound, saws, hammers, footsteps, came together like a heartbeat. Sarah moved between stations, helping where needed, guiding younger volunteers with calm precision. She wasn't just organizing, she was connecting, remembering each person's name, thanking them, making them feel like this wasn't Daniel's project, but theirs. A group of local teenagers painted the old signboard Daniel had salvaged from the fire. The faded letters, the river mill, slowly came back to life under new strokes of paint. One of the kids, a girl named June, asked Sarah, "What's this place gonna be when it's done?" Sarah crouched beside her, smiling. "A center for people and animals that need to heal. Veterans, rescue dogs, maybe even kids who just need space to breathe. A place to rebuild faith in small things." June tilted her head. "Faith?" Sarah looked toward Daniel, who was fitting a beam in the sun. "Yeah," she said. "Sometimes faith doesn't mean believing in miracles. It means believing in work, and in the people who still show up." Daniel heard her and felt a quiet warmth rise in his chest. He didn't say anything, but the rhythm of his hammer strikes changed, steadier, almost musical. Later that day, the river shimmered with orange light as the sun began to dip. The roof was almost finished. Rex had left the shade and now stood near the bank, tail wagging slow, head tilted. A dragonfly landed briefly on his nose. He sneezed, earning a laugh from nearby workers. Sarah leaned on a post beside Daniel as they watched the others wrap up. "You know," she said, "I didn't think they'd come." "They came because of you," Daniel said. She shook her head. "No, because of this place. Because it reminds them what it means to care about something together." Daniel followed her gaze across the yard. "Maybe, But I think they needed a reason to believe again. Sarah looked up at him, the light catching her eyes. And what about you? He thought about that. The answer wasn't clear, but he smiled anyway. Maybe I'm starting. 2. When the last nail was driven, the workers gathered under the porch for a group photo. The camera belonged to Frank, who fumbled with the timer, muttering curses that made the teenagers laugh. Sarah stood beside Daniel, Rex sitting obediently between them. The flash went off, bright, quick, and simple. But when the image developed later, it would capture something no one could describe, not just a building, not just faces, but belonging. As the crowd dispersed, Daniel stayed behind, watching the twilight settle over the valley. Fireflies began to drift near the river. The smell of cut wood lingered in the air. He walked to the edge of the porch, sat down, and felt Rex's head rest gently on his knee. "You kept watch again today," Daniel said, rubbing the dog's ear. "Can't build faith without a good guard." Rex huffed softly, half a bark, half a sigh. Sarah approached quietly from behind, holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to him, her voice soft in the fading light. "You know," she said, "it's strange. I came here thinking I'd help animals heal people, but I think it's the other way around." Daniel took a sip, the warmth spreading through him. "Maybe that's how it's supposed to work," he said. "We fix what's in front of us, and somewhere along the way, something inside starts to mend too." They sat in silence, the rhythm of the river their only companion. The mill stood strong beside them, no longer a ghost of what once was, but a promise of what could be. And beneath the willow, Rex lay down again, eyes half closed, guarding the peace he had helped restore. The morning of the opening dawned soft and golden, the kind of light that makes even dusk look like blessing. Mist curled along the riverbanks, drifting through the open windows of the River Mill Center for Healing, the name freshly painted in deep forest green on the sign that swayed gently above the porch. The mill, once gray and forgotten, now gleamed with life. New timbers glowed honey brown under the sun, and flower beds framed the steps where wild daisies nodded in the breeze. The scent of pine, oil, and baked bread filled the air. Daniel Brooks stood near the entrance, adjusting his shirt cuffs with hands that still carried the faint roughness of labor. He wore a simple linen shirt, sleeves rolled, and dark trousers that bore faint streaks of sawdust from some last-minute repair. His face had changed over the months, still angular, still marked by fine lines of worry and weather, but softer now, as though the hard edges had been sanded by purpose. He glanced around and exhaled. For the first time, this place didn't feel like a memory. It felt like a beginning. Rex sat beside him, chest broad, fur brushed and shining, wearing a thin blue collar Sarah had bought for the occasion. His ears flicked at every new sound, laughter, footsteps, distant chatter from the crowd gathering near the water. Sarah Whitmore moved through the hall, clipboard in hand, giving final instructions to volunteers. She wore a light summer dress beneath her work apron, her auburn hair braided and pinned back, a small silver necklace glinting at her throat. There was an ease in her stride that came from quiet pride rather than vanity, the kind of confidence earned through doing, not saying. She paused near the therapy room to check the arrangements, chairs in a circle, sunlight filtering through sheer curtains, and a row of small kennels by the wall where rescue dogs waited patiently, tails wagging, eyes bright. The crowd began to arrive. Locals from Maple Bend, neighboring towns, and a few veterans who had heard whispers of this place that welcomed both man and beast. There was laughter, the smell of coffee, and the creak of floorboards beneath familiar boots. Among them was Noah Green, 27, a former Army medic from North Carolina. He was lean, almost gaunt, with dark hair cropped short and eyes the color of smoke, distant, restless, searching. A faded scar ran across his left temple, barely visible beneath the light. He wore a long-sleeved shirt despite the warmth, sleeves pulled down tight as if to hide the tremor in his hands. He hadn't spoken much since arriving the night before, answering questions with short nods and polite smiles that never quite reached his eyes. Daniel noticed him standing apart from the crowd, near the open door where the river could be seen beyond. Something in the young man's posture, rigid yet fragile, tugged at memory. He walked over slowly, Rex following. "You must be Noah," Daniel said, voice low and steady. Noah nodded. "Yes, sir. Daniel smiled faintly. Don't call me sir. We're off duty here. That drew the smallest flicker of amusement from Noah's face. Right. You from around here? Used to be, Noah said. Before the accident. His voice caught slightly. Daniel didn't push. You've come a long way. That's what matters. He gestured toward the hall. Come inside when you're ready. We're just getting started. Noah's eyes shifted to Rex. He's military? Daniel nodded. Retired, like me. He listens better, though. Rex wagged his tail once, then stepped closer, sniffing Noah's hand before resting his chin there, permission without demand. Noah froze for a heartbeat, then exhaled. His fingers brushed the dog's fur like it might burn him, then stayed. Something almost imperceptible eased in his shoulders. By midday, the crowd gathered in the main hall. The wooden beams glowed in the sunlight, streaming through the high windows. The sound of the river murmured faintly beyond the open door. Sarah stood near the front, addressing everyone with her clear, calm voice. This place was built on loss, she began, but also on love, on the belief that healing doesn't happen alone. Whether you've worn a uniform, carried scars you can't show, or simply lost faith in the quiet, this place belongs to you. Her eyes found Daniel's across the room, and to those who never stopped rebuilding. The applause was warm, genuine. Daniel's throat tightened, but he nodded to her, a silent acknowledgement of everything unsaid. After the speech, people mingled through the rooms, some exploring, some sharing stories, some simply sitting by the windows, listening to the river. A few of the therapy dogs wandered among them, leaning gently into open hands, teaching trust without words. That was when it happened. Noah had been standing near the far corner, breathing hard. Too many voices, too many faces, too much noise pressing in. His chest tightened, the room spun. The sound of clapping, someone laughing too loud, turned into the sharp pop of an explosion in his mind. His hands trembled. He stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. Hey, easy, Daniel said, stepping forward. But Noah didn't hear him. His breath came shallow, quick, the world collapsing into static. He dropped to his knees, eyes wide, lost somewhere only he could see. Rex moved first. Without command, the dog padded forward, slow, deliberate. The crowd stilled, unsure what to do. The shepherd stopped in front of Noah and sat down. He didn't bark. He didn't lick. He just leaned forward, pressing his head gently against the man's knee. For a moment, Noah didn't react. Then, instinctively, his hand found the dog's fur. His breathing hitched, then slowed. Rex lifted his head slightly, their eyes meeting, steady brown against, haunted gray. Daniel crouched beside them, his voice quiet, careful. Breathe with him, he said. In through your nose, out slow. Noah followed, shaky at first, then steadier. The air came easier now. One breath, then another, then another. The silence in the room was complete, except for that shared rhythm. Inhale, exhale, heartbeats evening out. Rex stayed where he was, patient as stone. His tail gave a faint thump when Noah's shoulders dropped and his hands stopped shaking. Sarah knelt on Noah's other side, her voice soft. That's it. You're safe here? Noah looked at them both, disoriented, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on his face. I don't know what just happened, he whispered. Daniel put a hand on his shoulder. You remembered how to breathe, he said. The young man gave a broken laugh that turned into a sob. Feels like the first time in years. Daniel nodded. Then you just learned the first rule of being alive again. When the crowd began to move again, something had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. The air itself felt different, lighter. People spoke in hushed tones, some wiping tears, others smiling through them. Noah sat quietly by the window afterward, Rex's head resting on his lap. Sarah brought him a glass of water and a soft towel. You did good, she said. Noah shook his head. He did better. He looked down at Rex. I didn't think I could feel calm again. Sarah smiled. That's why we built this place. Sometimes peace just needs someone to remind it where it lives. Outside, the afternoon sun poured gold across the river. Daniel stood on the porch, watching the light dance over the water wheel. Sarah joined him, her hand brushing his. For a moment, neither spoke. Inside, Noah's quiet laughter drifted through the open window, blending with the hum of summer and the steady rhythm of the river, a rhythm that had once been broken and was now whole again. Daniel turned to Sarah, his voice thick with gratitude. "You see that? He found it." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You both did." He looked down at Rex lying in the doorway, eyes half closed, the picture of contentment. "He's the real healer here," Daniel said. Sarah smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe faith has 4 legs after all." As the sun sank behind the trees, the old mill glowed with amber light. What had begun as one man's attempt to rebuild his past had become a sanctuary for others to rediscover their future. And in that light, soft, golden, alive, hope breathed again. Early autumn arrived quietly in Maple Bend. The mornings were cool now, wrapped in the faint scent of pine and river mist. The leaves along the river turned gold and amber, drifting downstream like small glowing memories carried by the current. The air had softened, no longer heavy with the sweat of summer, but light, reflective, touched by the hush that always comes before winter's first breath. The river mill stood complete. The walls gleamed in warm wood tones, the windows opened to let in the crisp morning air. The sound of the repaired water wheel filled the valley, not mechanical, but rhythmic, like a slow and steady heartbeat. Where once there had been ruin and silence, there was now laughter, footsteps, and the quiet murmur of healing. The mill had become what it was always meant to be, a place for those finding their way home. Daniel Brooks arrived early that morning, wearing his usual canvas jacket over a faded work shirt. His hair had grown longer, silver now more visible at his temples, and the sun had left fine lines around his eyes, the kind that come from squinting into light, not shadow. His gait still carried the careful weight of a soldier, but his shoulders had eased, his movements slower, deliberate, like a man who'd made peace with the silence. Rex trotted at his side, coat thickening for the colder season. The old German shepherd's stride remained sure, his eyes bright, but Daniel had begun to notice the faint stiffness in his legs after long days, a reminder that time had been moving for them both. Sarah Whitmore was already there, arranging flowers along the porch railing. She had traded her usual work apron for a soft wool sweater, the color of smoke, and a scarf of deep burgundy. Her hair, though windswept, glowed against the morning light, and her cheeks carried the pale flush of someone who still greeted each day with purpose. She turned when she heard the footsteps. "You're early," she said, smiling. "I thought you'd take the morning off for once." Daniel shook his head with mock seriousness. "And let you hang the dedication plaque crooked? Never." She rolled her eyes, but there was warmth behind it. "You'd better make sure you don't fall off another roof." He smirked. "No roofs left to fall from." Sarah stepped aside, revealing the steel plaque resting on the porch table, brushed metal, clean, engraved with a line that caught the sun. "For those who built and those who stayed." Daniel traced the words with his fingertips. Beneath the inscription were 3 names: Carter Hayes, Elijah Ward, Tom Sanderson, men who had served beside him 12 years ago, men who had died when the factory explosion took them, leaving him alive and questioning why. The names gleamed now, not as ghosts, but as foundations. "You sure you're ready for this?" Sarah asked softly. Daniel nodded. "It's time." By midday, a small crowd had gathered. The community had come again. Veterans, townsfolk, children from Lila's class, even Noah Green, who stood near the entrance, calmer than before, his posture relaxed, a leash in his hand. Beside him sat Scout, a young golden retriever recently rescued and trained at the center, tail thumping softly on the porch boards. Frank Delaney leaned on his cane beside Daniel, his gray beard bristling in the wind. "Never thought I'd see this place shining again," he said. "You did good, son." Daniel shook his head. "We did good." Sarah motioned for quiet, her voice carrying over the river's hum. "This center was built by hands that once knew war, loss, and silence," she said. "But today, it stands for something greater, for the courage to rebuild, the faith to forgive, and the love that keeps us here." Daniel stepped forward then, holding the plaque. He found his place on the main post beside the entrance, the same beam his father had set when the mill was first built. With steady hands, he mounted the steel plate, hammering each nail with care, the metallic ring echoing like a hymn. When it was done, he stepped back, the crowd silent behind him. The sunlight caught on the engraving, scattering warm light across the porch. He spoke quietly, but every word carried. They were builders, not just of walls, but of people. I used to think I came back here to fix what broke in me, but maybe I came back to finish what they started. Noah nodded, his hand resting on Scout's neck. They'd be proud, he said softly. Daniel smiled. They were the best men I knew, and they never stopped showing me the way. Even now. The wind stirred then, sweeping a handful of leaves across the porch, carrying their gold and red reflections into the river. For a long moment, no one moved. Later that afternoon, when the others had gone, Daniel sat alone by the water with Rex at his feet. The air was cool, the sun low enough to turn the world into a mirror of amber and glass. The river shimmered beneath the willow trees, where light slipped through leaves like slow-moving fire. Sarah had gone into town for supplies, leaving Daniel with a thermos of coffee and her favorite wool blanket tossed over the porch rail. He didn't drink it yet. Instead, he watched the water wheel turn, slow, steady, endless. The sound of it felt like breathing. "You see that, boy?" Daniel murmured, scratching Rex's neck. "All that noise we made, all that work, and now it's quiet again." Rex let out a low, contented rumble, half growl, half sigh, and rested his head on Daniel's knee. Daniel looked toward the plaque gleaming on the wall. "We didn't forget them, Rex. We live for them. That's how it's supposed to be." The dog's ears flicked at the sound of his voice. He shifted slightly, pressing closer. A heron flew low over the river, its wings brushing the air like pages turning. The reflection followed. One bird, one shadow, one line of movement through gold water. Daniel felt a weight lift inside him that he hadn't realized he still carried. He thought of his father, the old lessons about work, faith, and the quiet dignity of doing the next right thing. He thought of Sarah's laughter echoing through the halls, of Noah's first smile since the war, of the children painting signs in the yard. The mill had been rebuilt, but more than that, something unseen had been restored. It wasn't redemption. It was continuation. The choice to keep building even when no one's watching, even when the world doesn't demand it. He took a slow breath, feeling the rhythm of the water against the bank. "We did good, didn't we?" he said quietly. Rex lifted his head, eyes bright, and nudged his owner's hand. Daniel chuckled softly. "Yeah, I know. You did most of the work." The sun began to set, bleeding copper light across the valley. The river carried it downstream, a slow-moving current of color. And in that glow, everything, the mill, the river, the man, the dog, seemed to breathe in one shared, peaceful rhythm. When Sarah returned later, she found them still there. Daniel sitting on the step, Rex asleep against his leg, the steel plaque glinting above their heads. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The air was full of meaning already. The river kept flowing, light rippling across its surface, endless, forgiving, alive. When autumn deepened and the last leaves slipped quietly into the river mill stood not just as a building, but as a promise kept. What began with one weary veteran and a faithful dog had become a living testament to something larger. The quiet power of redemption, the courage to rebuild after ruin, and the truth that healing rarely happens alone. The people of Maple Bend no longer came just to work or to heal. They came to belong. Veterans found purpose teaching kids how to build birdhouses. Widows brought homemade bread for those who had no families nearby. The young helped the old plant trees along the riverbank. Every hammer strike, every shared laugh, every gentle hand laid on a dog's fur became part of a single heartbeat. Proof that faith can be built not from miracles, but from moments of simple kindness repeated until they change a town. Daniel often said that the river mill was never really rebuilt. It was reborn through grace. And maybe that's how God works among us, not in thunder or spectacle, but in the steady rhythm of good hands, in the warmth of second chances, in a river that keeps flowing even after the storm. So, tonight, as the lights of the mill glow across the water, remember this. Every act of compassion is a prayer. Every hand that helps is a miracle waiting to be seen. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, or who you're praying for today. And if you believe in loyalty, faith, and the power of new beginnings, subscribe to join our growing family of storytellers. May God bless you and your loved ones, with peace in your heart, strength in your days, and light that never fades.